Can anger help us perform better in martial arts? Can it help clear our heads and fight our best fight? Anger has been linked to negative health effects like heart disease and early death. And because of this, there's been a lot of commentary on anger being definitively bad for our health and well-being. And the suggestion is also that anger muddies up our thinking, which would be terrible in a martial arts context, right? Where you need to have a clear head to know what to do next. But it turns out that these concerns aren't totally accurate. Two common ways of dealing with anger are suppressing it and letting it out in an eruptive way. So when we suppress that anger, for the first thing, we hold it in and we think, maybe anger is a bad thing and it's a sign that we're weak and that we have no control, which would, indicate that we're not a good martial artist, right? So we push it down deep in an effort to regain that control back. But that anger doesn't necessarily go away. And it certainly doesn't help us address the thing that caused the anger in the first place. So it turns out that, doing this, it not only doesn't solve the problem, but suppressing our anger has been linked with depression, which makes sense when you think that, often we feel depressed when we feel hopeless, like the situation is hopeless and we have no control. So a situation comes up, we feel angry about it, and then we suppress those feelings, we push them down, and nothing changes, right? Nothing changes, and you still end up feeling powerless in the situation that sparked that anger in the first place. So let's give an example here. Let's say you're training at a dojo, and there's another student who treats you really disrespectfully. They talk down to you on a regular basis, they put you down, they act like they're better than you, they make you feel like garbage. And you think, oh, this sucks, right? But anger's a bad thing. I shouldn't be angry. I need to exercise control. That wouldn't make me a good martial artist. So you push that anger down, try and ignore it, and you just keep training and try and ignore the situation and keep your mouth shut. But the result of this is that you end up feeling pretty crappy and the situation continues. The problem hasn't gone away. This jerk still treats you like trash, right? And now you just feel powerless to solve it, and you've pushed your anger down in order to be a better person or whatever, but the situation continues and nothing is solved. So the other alternative that we commonly go with is letting that anger out without control, right? And that's not so good either. When we lash out with anger, we risk hurting ourselves and hurting others. And feeling like this often or for long periods of time, it has been linked to negative health effects such as high blood pressure. So let's consider our martial arts scenario. So this asshole who talks down to us and treats us with disrespect, instead of keeping your mouth shut, you decide to let out all of your anger. Okay, so you open up a can of whoop ass on this guy, and you beat the snot out of him whenever you're sparring. You hit him really hard whenever you're doing partner drills. You kick him in the groin whenever you have an opportunity. So you're raging mad and you want to let it out. And this does feel a lot better than holding it in. Anger does feel really good when we let it out like this. But now you've opened yourself up to some problems, potential lawsuit, right? And you've also shown that you have zero control over yourself and you might lose other people's respect by acting in this way. And also what you're doing is you're telling this other person, hey, you can hit me hard back, right? So you hit them hard, they hit you harder, and it just continues and it never stops. So letting your anger out in this situation, it might make you feel really good. But if you do so without moderating that anger, without trying to control it, you're likely not thinking as clearly as you need to be in this situation. And you're probably not even thinking anymore, right? So you're just reacting to that anger, which isn't good. So suppressing that anger on the one hand, or letting it out without control or moderation, it doesn't solve anything, and it can even make it worse. And both of these tactics likely do have negative health consequences like depression, high blood pressure, heart disease, that kind of thing. And they do have a negative impact on our ability to think clearly and act appropriately in a martial arts context. There is a third option though, and this way is not linked to negative health effects, and it's much more likely to result in a positive outcome. So think about this. Anger is designed to protect us. It's a normal emotion. And when those angry feels come up, that's an indication that something is wrong. Something is wrong. That's why those feelings exist in the first place. It's like a big neon sign pointing and saying, pay attention to this right now. That's what anger does. It says, pay attention. So that anger comes up because you're being disrespected, because someone you care about is being disrespected, because your boundaries are being crossed, because someone is treating you or someone else poorly, because you feel threatened in some way, because your way of life or your perspective or your values are under attack. That's when anger comes up. So anger demands a solution. Our anger indicates that there is a problem, and our physical symptoms of anger, the tension in our muscles, the rapid breathing and heart rate, the adrenaline, all of that, it motivates us to find a solution. And that anger can be good for us if we use it to solve the problem in an effective way. Because once that problem is solved, we have no further use for that anger. We don't need to feel angry anymore, and the anger goes away, right? The cause of the anger is solved, and then we feel better. And then there's no risk of high blood pressure or depression or all of those things. And then we also get all the benefits of, feeling confident in ourselves that we were able to handle that problem effectively and assertively, right? And that knowledge that we're not willing to put up with other people's bullshit, right? That makes us feel better. So think about that jerk at the dojo. Instead of suffering in silence and putting up with it, or going the other way and pummeling the crap out of them, to make yourself feel better, you can go with the third path. And you can see that anger as an indication that this situation needs to be addressed. You feel disrespected, you feel threatened, you feel angry, and how this student is treating you is not okay. That anger comes up because what they're doing is not okay. It's assigned to you, right? So now you can see that anger as a teacher and pay attention to what it's telling you. And when you do that, you can assert yourself and set boundaries with this person. Instead of suppressing it or reacting to that anger, you can instead respond to it and express it in a calm and appropriate way. So by doing this, you are regaining control. That anger, in that moment, it provided clarity for you. It cleared your head and it helped you focus on what was important, which is that person is not treating you properly, not treating you respectfully. And it mobilized you. This anger mobilized you to take action. And that's what's so powerful and valuable about anger, is that it does motivate action. I was sparring in class once with a student who was getting a little too rough with me, and she was an aggressive fighter. I was an aggressive fighter, but she was being a lot more aggressive than I was comfortable with. And I knew she could potentially hurt me. And we were just, sparring lightly in class. This was just training. It wasn't a tournament. We weren't out for blood. We weren't out for points, nothing like that. And yeah, I could see in her eyes that she wanted to hit me hard, right? And so she kept coming in, and then she hit me really hard and knocked the wind out of me. And I doubled over to catch my breath, and I looked up and she was smirking at me. And then she started to move in to come in again. She wanted to hurt me, right? She was happy about this. And this pissed me off. This sparked my anger. I got so mad. I thought, okay, I need to get control back. And I didn't want to suppress it. If I'd suppressed it, she would have just kept hurting me. And that's not okay, right? I could have ended up injured, or just, demoralized and not wanting to spar with her again, right? If I had let it out, just lashed out with anger and just come at her and started kicking the crap out of her, that wouldn't have been good either. And it probably would have perpetuated the cycle of violence between us, right? Where, I hit her harder and she hits me harder back. So I waited a little bit, we sparred a little bit, but I was fired up, right? And I used all of my adrenaline and the tension in my muscles to get kind of prepared. And I waited until she came in again. And then I came in at the same time and I punched her just a little bit too hard in the face. Not hard enough to give her a concussion, but hard enough that it stopped her in her tracks. She stopped. She was not expecting that from me. She was expecting me to just submit to her dominance, and there was no way I was putting up with that bullshit. So I clocked her in the face and she stopped. And then, our sensei came over and said, "Hey, Sabrina, just back off a bit. It's a little too hard." But he kind of smirked too, because he saw what was happening. And then the funny thing is she backed off after that. She didn't hit me nearly so hard. She realized, here I was saying, this is my boundary. You've crossed it. You've crossed my limit, and I'm not cool with this. And I'm going to let you know. And, whether or not my actions were good, that's debatable, but it made the point and it solved the problem. And she did respect me more after that. I could see it in her eyes as grudging respect. And I knew that with her, trying to talk about it wouldn't solve anything. She was that type of person that she would not have respected me if I'd said, "Hey, back off a bit. You're hitting me too hard." She would have just kept hitting me hard or hit me even harder. She's that type of person. And so I knew I had to meet physicality with physicality, whether that's a good thing or not. It certainly was effective. And, with any other student who was maybe being too aggressive, but not meaning to be, I could say, hey, like, can you back off a bit? You're hitting too hard. And they say, oh, sorry, and they'd back off, and that would work. And I've done that lots with sparring partners. And I expect the same from other people when they say to me, hey, back off. I totally respect that, right? But in this situation, I knew she needed to be punched. Studies do show that anger is a motivating force, and studies also show that anger can help people feel more optimistic when they're in a stressful situation. Our anger mobilizes us to do what's right for us or right for others, and if we act on it in a respectful way, it can absolutely be a path to positive solutions. And the physical symptoms of anger, these on their own can be a really powerful motivator for action. I personally have performed some of my very best belt tests and tournaments when I've been angry. But the key for me was staying in control of that anger. I didn't suppress it, but neither did I beat the crap out of my sparring partners or opponents at tournaments. I made note of what got me angry in the first place. And then I chose to use that anger to my advantage. So in those moments, instead of focusing on what made me angry, the thoughts about the situation that made me angry, I would instead focus on my physical symptoms. I'd say, okay, I don't have time to deal with whatever it is made me mad, so I'm going to focus on the symptoms. So my racing heart, my rapid breathing, my tension in my muscles, my adrenaline, I'd focus on that, and I'd use that to fuel really intense training or a really intense performance. And this really works for me in these situations where I have this anger. What do I do with it? Okay, I'm going to channel this into my performance right now. And I'm not doing it in an angry way. It's sort of that anger then becomes aggression, I guess, is how I convert that. And then later, once the training or the tournament or belt test is done, I would, address the cause of the anger itself, the thing that made me mad, but I would do so in a more calm and productive and assertive way, which I could do because I had burnt off all of that adrenaline and tension. So if you're not angry, I don't suggest you try to make yourself angry. That's not necessarily maybe something you want to strive for, but when that feeling does come up, try not to write it off as a bad thing. It is totally normal and it can absolutely be useful. So instead of pretending it doesn't exist or punching holes in every wall around you, think about how you can use that anger to your advantage, because you will be a much stronger and healthier martial artist for doing so.